probably the most famous herb at this point in time for this is ginkgo. Ginkgo biloba. It's interesting, its metaphor. Its leaf itself, being a bilobed leaf, has connoted an awful lot for longevity in different societies. Certainly in Chinese society, where it's the most, you're going to find it in all the old Taoist temples. You'll find it's yin and yang. I remember seeing the major ginkgo tree in the Forbidden City in China, in the Taoist temple in the Forbidden City. And it's big enough that 2 or maybe even 3 people couldn't put their arms around. So this is a big old honk of tree, right?
The trunk?
The trunk.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty huge. It's been there for, I don't know, but a long time. I'm going to estimate 1,000 years or so. It was big, it was old. I saw some down in Wuxi in Shanghai that were even more impressive, much taller. And again, 2 to 3 people couldn't put their arms around them. So these things can live to be very old. So in their essence, they're a connoting of longevity. So we're using them in a different way now for longevity that's completely different than the traditional way. But it also is the oldest known tree in the world. It's a gymnosperm, and it's estimated it lives between 200 and 300 million years ago. So it has a completely different phenomena than virtually any other tree on the planet, especially gymnosperms, which are some of the oldest living species. What we tend to use is the dried leaf that was hardly ever used traditionally. They usually use the fresh nut, which is the grossest, stinkingest thing you ever can imagine. For it to ripen, you have to let it rot, and it really smells gross, but then you take it and use it, you can lightly roast it, etc. That's how it was used historically. The nuts were used way more commonly. And there are several places in Vancouver, in Chinatown, you can get ginkgo nut soup, and it tastes really good. And it's very delicious. It's de-stunk by that time, meaning it rot. But I've walked through places where I could smell the ginkgo 3 blocks away and knew that there was ginkgos in the area before I ever saw a leaf or anything like that. It's a very distinctive leaf, that bilobe function. And I just I find that fan biloba, which represents the 2 hemispheres of the brain, represents yin and yang historically, has a lot of function to it. Historically, as I say, it's the oldest known living tree species around. This duality of the yin and yang has been celebrated for a long time in history. It was certainly used since the Han Dynasty in 220 BCE or 206 BCE as a medicinal nut. The medicinal nut was mostly used for the lungs, for respiratory issues, and for fatigue to a degree. It was the bioflavonoids were first extracted as ginkgosides, terpene lactones or ginkgosides in 1932 by Japanese. The Germans jumped on it in the 60s, and they really created the first ginkgo biloba extract, or it was EGB 761 is the brand code name. And so really a lot of studies have been done on that. To put it in perspective, they take somewhere between 50 and 75, usually it said 50, but it really has to do with the bioflavonoid content. They put it through a very specific extraction process that uses a lot of heavy-duty commercial chemicals, industrial chemicals, to make 1 pound of it. So when you're going to the store and getting ginkgo biloba extract, you're not getting a tincture. You're getting literally a natural pharmaceutical. So this tincture here is literally a 1 in 5. So that makes it 250 times weaker than the stuff you would use in a standardized extract. So you're not going to get the same function. You can get kind of a dream of that function. And there's still a lot of herbalists that will put it in formula with others for brain stimulation. I doubt that it works. First of all, flavonoids aren't soluble in alcohol. They're going to fall out to a large degree. They're not really soluble in the alcohol. And second of all, the extract level is too low. But at least we can energetically perceive it in a tincture. Yes?
Aren't the leaves almost poisonous?
In large quantities, they're poisonous. But when they're extracted to this degree, they're not. So you're quite right that if you made a bunch of tea out of the ginkgo leaves, you're probably going to, in the long run, have problematic things. Taking a little squirt like we're passing around is not going to give you a toxic effect, but it can be. So again, modern use of ginkgo barely reflects the ancient use of it, which was more for lungs and things along those lines. The major group of chemicals are these ginkolosides. Now, what this is, again, is a bioflavonoid attached to a sugar, which makes it a glycoside. And there's several different ones. These flavonol-lactane diterpenes are the significant amount the studies are being used for. And there has really been done a lot of studies on this. Every year there's an international ginkgo conference for the last 10 or so, maybe even 20 years. And there's usually about 10 to 30 papers released of these things. So to say there's 150 to 200 papers on ginkgo is probably a gross under-exaggeration of how many there are. Mostly when you're doing it, you're talking a standardized extract. That's 25 or 24% flavanols, with 6% being a terpene or a diterpene. That's typically what you're going to look on the side of the bottle. We talked about at the beginning of this course, or at least in Western Materia Medica 1, that standardized extracts are not necessarily all what they shape up to be. This would be an extreme exception to the rule. The research behind this standardized extract, and we also talked about milk thistle a little bit, outweighs its phenomena, but at the very most we have to call these natural pharmaceuticals. They're pharmaceutical grade substances being derived from a plant, so they're natural. But let's also put that in perspective. That's not as concentrated as sucrose is from sugarcane or sugar beets. So literally sugar is a naturally derived pharmaceutical, because you have to go through this heavy extraction process to get it up to the level of sucrose. So it's kind of in the same area, and people aren't going to stop eating sugar. That's where the medical research around ginkgo is deep, as I say. There is many, many different things it'll do, but if I had to sum it up in the 3 decades of deep research on this, it's a flavanol. And as you might remember, flavanols work on capillary beds. So it's particularly good in circulation in general. It doesn't matter what circulation you're talking about. Certainly its center of gravity, I've kind of forgot what it was. No, just kidding. It's for the brain. It's for the activity of the mind. So it seems to go to the mind, cross the blood-brain barrier, which we'll talk about more in a few moments. It concentrates in the brain, but it works on any capillary basis in the body. So it will work just as good on neuropathies and Raynaud's disease in the peripheral area. So if a person's having neuropathies related to diabetes in their feet or in their hands or whatever, ginkgo's your herb again. It'll work on those flavanols. It'll also protect the liver like milk thistle, but it's not as good. It'll protect the lungs, but not as good as some other herbs. But every place you have a concentrated capillary bed, you can use ginkgo for. A lot of these mass bioflavonoids are that in general. It really comes down to, though, that this is the standardized extract, the deeply processed ginkolosides, or these bioflavonoids.